Welcome to the Translator's Note. Reviewers are calling Practice of the Presence a revolutionary translation by Carmen Acevedo Butcher, quote, the new standard for Brother Lawrence's wise teachings, a spiritual classic since 1692. Her translation offers the first complete translation of his work, making his wisdom available to a wide audience. Order it today from carmenbutcher.com for a taste of the friar's enduring, juicy calmness and deep joy. Read for you by the author. Hi, I'm Carmen. I want to read for you the translator's note. My friend Mary urged me to put it at the front of the book, so I did. Thank you, Mary, for your encouragement. As I read this translator's note, I'm mindful of the revolutions in Iran led by teenaged young women who are braver than I can imagine. I think also of the erosion of freedoms around the world, including in my own country of the United States. I pray that this little translation might bring some peace, as the friar Brother Lawrence always does, and that together we can love ourselves and each other for a world where there is less economic injustice, less hunger, less greed, more inclusion, and more delight in our differences. Translator's note. A down-to-earth mystic, Brother Lawrence shares wisdom with a humble simplicity of spirit and language, and my hope for this translation is to embody that. It began silently, with doubts. Could I translate 17th century French? A new challenge. I knew the friar first as fragments in articles and devotionals, and when asked years ago to write a piece on him, I'd only had time to read his work, in translation. So when I met him in the original and whole, would his words feed my soul? Would I find his theology genuinely kind? Would his teaching have practical application for my anxiety? In short, would his writings reward the kind of attention translation requires? So many unknowns. I started by typing the friar's French words letter by letter, directly reading from the 1692 first edition, and their meaning leapt from the page joyfully, and they were true, and they helped my soul immediately. Translating them was hard, and yes, I could do it, or rather, I was making progress, page after page of linguistic puzzles soothing me. Feeling his cheerful French words under my fingertips and hearing the rhythm of his calm voice, and then revising the English translation one more time. By the end, my doubts had been alchemized into peace. Each endless, tiny effort made me happy, meditative. As a friend says, knitting makes her feel. This intimate process is described vividly by Barthes or Barthes, translator Kate Briggs. Quote, I think we owe translators, and perhaps also ourselves, some recognition of what it might have meant to have handled every single word, space and punctuation mark of the writing to be translated, to have taken a decision in relation to its every single word, space and punctuation mark, which might in turn be another way of saying each and every one of its risks. mindful that this singular experience almost defies description. Briggs essays anyway in this little art, and my translating experiences resonate with her musings on poet Paul Valéry. His experiences translating Virgil from Latin to French, which he names a, quote, making, unmaking, remaking, sacrificing here and there, restoring as best I could what I had first rejected. This, quote, labor of approximation, as he called translation, quote, with its little successes, its regrets, its conquests, and its resignations, created, quote, an interesting feeling in him, quote, well known to me, he says, of being, quote, a poet at work. What pulled me into Brother Lawrence's work and kept me there, bringing me back again and again, doing the re-seeing of revising, was his good heart, where good means kind. Being with him is calming. Listen to these gentle lines that are the heart of his practice. Quote, above all, become accustomed to talking with God often. We cannot put too much trust in such a good and faithful friend who will never let us down. Words he wrote in his letters. This loving, ordinary relationship is the practice of the presence. This simple prayer is a dynamic process that folds in kindness, conversation with the divine, and a constant state of return. It's a proven way to connect with our understanding of the numinous. His practice genuinely opens up to mystery, and because of that, the practice of the presence transcends any boxing in of mystery and faith and community. Brother Lawrence's teaching simplifies and deepens prayer and places prayer in the realm of mindfulness. The practice of the presence, he says, is, quote, the most sacred, the most robust, the easiest, and the most effective form of prayer. And even by wanting to practice it, we are already moving into presence. What also drew me to him was how real he is. He developed this practice from his own experience, a practice he needed for his own healing. And this translation honors and shares his personal wisdom. A disabled veteran living with a leg injury, a former prisoner of war raised in poverty, lacking a traditional education, a Parisian with a tyrant for a king, a failed religious hermit, an ex-footman, a self-dubbed, quote, clumsy oaf, a survivor of religious wars, a sufferer of anxiety, a man often in physical agony from war injuries, and a cook and sandal repairer. This lay brother regularly stopped work when chapel bells rang and headed to communal prayers, limping there with red, still wet dishpan hands. His exceptional calm and responses to life's hardships make this unassuming friar an accessible and humanizing mentor of the time-tested practice of the presence prayer. This book, Practice of the Presence, offers new ways of seeing that surpass our sometimes tense and either this or that mindsets. And my work with this translation seeks to honor and share his positive, open-hearted wisdom. As a lover of words that do important, meaningful work, I respect, even love, the pragmatic nature of the friar's teaching, which knows this practice as rising organically from human need, even as it helps those who read the words feel more at ease in their own skin. My intention, as congruent with the original writings of Brother Lawrence, is to bring a translation that heals making space for being happier and kinder. For those who engage in the process and the presence, at first this will seem slow, but soon makes itself known as the most necessary, crafting deeply helpful changes to a soul. This is practice that has been deeply personal for me. I know from my own experience of practicing it for decades in response to childhood trauma, before I even knew what presence was or that praying had begun, as I walked alone through endless sloping green pastures in rural Red Earth, Georgia, clambering over and sometimes snagging shorts on rusting, sagging barbed wire fences as a child and then as a teenager. I moved further into silence. Alongside grazing cows, white gold oxeye daisies, and soaring red-tailed hawks as company, I experienced the way nature holds and teaches an injured soul, and understood that this prayer of presence was somehow with me through good days, sad days, hard days, and thankful days. It continues this familiar conversation. Being good at it is not the point, which makes the way of Brother Lawrence especially attractive. The friar invites us to contemplation that might begin with an injury, a joy, a job, a cup of coffee or tea, a new day, and or any gritty, uncontrollable aspect of our human life. This practice turns to God or love or however a person might conceive of meaning, checks in, and comes back to the quotidian. This recursive process helps gently develop self-compassion and also moves us into making a positive difference in our world. Many who practice this return to presence, including me, find that when working with the mind like this, we might see needs arise as it brings up issues of trauma that want to be healed. So, bringing in a spiritual director or therapist can be helpful for supporting the practice and healing the wounds. Because Brother Lawrence is practical and teaches the universal theme of love, he has a following from diverse traditions that includes unaffiliated spiritual nuns, N-O-N-E-S, Roman Catholics and Protestants, meditation practitioners, Buddhists who appreciate his Zen approach, disciples of major religious groups, believers of other spiritual traditions, and those beyond conventional categories, including many not usually interested in religion or spirituality. Philosopher Aldous Huxley said the friar's practice of the presence, quote, has enjoyed a kind of celebrity in circles otherwise completely uninterested in mental prayer or spiritual exercises. My translation of practice of the presence walks out to meet this transboundary audience welcomed by the friar's wise teaching on love. As I translated, I kept close to language that is current and timeless. I listened for English words with authenticity, accuracy, and inclusivity, and I opened for paradigm shifts and relevance because his teachings are relatable to a wide-ranging global audience. Translation is always with and always for, and as Brother Lawrence crossed the boundaries of time, reached beyond traditions, to presence and to the persons around him with love, this translation reaches widely as well, a translation that in the heart of Brother Lawrence is inclusive. As I translated, I was also teaching, and so my translating includes my students, who name themselves as African American, Asian, Asian American, Australian, Bahamian, Belarusian, American, Black, British, Brown, Burmese, Cherokee, Chicanics, Chinese, Danish, Egyptian American, Ethiopian American, European, European American, Filipino American, Filipinx, German, Italian American, Hmong, Honduran, Indigenous, Iranian, Israeli, Jamaican, Japanese American, Kenyan, Korean, Korean, Polish, Sicilian, Hungarian American, Latina, Latine, Latino, Lebanese, Malaysian, Mestiza, Mexican, Mexican American, Native American, Navajo, Nahuatl, Nahuatl, Nigerian, Norwegian, Polish, Romanian, Russian, Salvadoran, Sinhalese, South Asian, South Korean, Sri Lankan, Swedish, Taiwanese, Turkish. They are diverse, and I seek to honor them by naming a few. With this global audience in mind, I translated the friar's wisdom with respect for its original meaning in its early modern French and for its complex 17th century historical context. My purpose in creating an accurate translation is crafted by my studies and years of teaching, publishing in linguistics, and experiences translating other spiritually profound works like The Cloud of Unknowing. I also translated with respect for my experiences with self-compassion and with my neurodiverse mind. I translate with gratitude for patient K-12 educators who guided me when focusing seemed impossible because the alphabet was slippery, moving, swapping places. And I felt, like Brother Lawrence, quote, an oaf, living for decades with an undiagnosed learning disability, dyslexia, and from age 16 with untreated depression, making long to-do lists and becoming high-functioning at a high personal cost. As a therapist told me, quote, you coped the best you could with what you knew then. Gradually, and partly because words stymied me, I became one of those studious, bespectacled people who loves etymologies. The heft of word histories was reassuring because it provided ballast for floating letters and helped me learn spellings and meanings also, because dyslexia meant that to read I had to look again and again at words. They became quite beautiful, the way you cannot stand on the rim of the Grand Canyon, look once, and see it all. Re-seeing, it turns out, is what a translator needs. The word respect looks again, from the Latin re, anew, and specere, look at. So respecting the text creates recursive processes that bring this translator joy. From the first day that I put my physical hands into the friar's French prose, typing his words directly from the first edition, feeling his rhythm and pulse, I revisited each word often. The word respect consults multiple dictionaries, reads history books, studies maps, searches older French works to meet words in their original contexts, and makes countless passes through a text. It rereads. It adjusts nuances. It starts over to do it again. Respect's willingness to re-see nurtures accuracy. At heart, a, quote, doing with care, caring, taking care of, from the Latin curare, quote, cure, look after. One minor example of accuracy or caring was seeing a puzzling en soi, en space, soi, for in itself in modern French editions, in contexts where it does not fit. So I looked again at the 1692 edition and saw en foi, enfoi, for in faith, not en soi, en space, soi. Foi, foi, was an alternative spelling of foi, foi, for faith, which I translated. The friar uses foi, foi, intentionally, in wordplay, to communicate that the divine aid of faith, foi, empowers a person trying to practice the presence with, quote, faithfulness, fidelite, fidelite. The stray soi, soi, happened when someone mistook the lowercase f in foi, foi, as a long s, which looks like a lowercase f with just a left side nub, then changed the lettering to make the baffling soi. En foi, enfoi, in faith, appears multiple times in the friar's own writings. This translation brings foi, foi, back. Proust and Flaubert translator Lydia Davis calls this approach of returning to a text, quote, honoring it closely. You grow a translation. As vital as accuracy for a translation is also joy. This is joy defined by cadence and by kindness. Reading the friar in French is beautiful and immersive, and the English sentences deserve a similar beauty and sinew, rhythms and sounds enhancing meaning, drawing you back to hear them again, feel soothed, gain peace, and leave delighted. Reading should also bring joy in the sense of inclusivity. New for translations of practice of the presence is this translation approach that honors its original welcoming spirit, which repeats tout le monde, T-O-U-T-L-E-M-O-N-D-E, almost a dozen times for, quote, everybody or all, in communal senses like we all share the experience of suffering and we can all develop this mindful practice. While Brother Lawrence and mostly his editor Beaufort lack the gender-fluid approach to God of, say, a Julian of Norwich, this kindness practiced by the friar that drew Beaufort to him invited both to shake this off. As I revisited the text, the book's essence, as wisdom literature, its spirit emerged, calling for freedom from a centuries-old prism of customary dualistic language. Earlier translations sometimes even extended the convention of dualism by inserting masculine nouns and or pronouns for the French tous, T-O-U-S, for, quote, all people. Beaufort describes the friar's kindness in his eulogy, quote, he became everything to everyone, tous, T-O-U-S, to bring all to God, while traditional versions render it, quote, he became everything to all men, tous, T-O-U-S, to bring them all to God. Also, feminine references in past translations were altered where the friar's original choices seem intentional. His mistress, M-A-I-T-R-E-S-S-E, for mistress, in letter 7, to a nun, has in the past been translated as, quote, master, even though this mistress, shows his empathetic audience focus in his letter to a nun, who would appreciate his comparison to the balanced monastic power dynamic and to her woman-governed convent. Quote, "The will is the mistress of all our powers," as this translation reads. Where the friar and priest use masculine images for God like, quote, Lord, Master, King, Seigneur, Maître, ou only some 50 times combined. This translation, reflecting on these words and their autocratic associations with 17th century structures of inequity like feudalism and manorialism, consistently chooses friend, teacher, monarch to represent the friar's healthy teaching for today. In such choices, this translation takes a text-aware, history-cognizant, holistic, and community-minded approach that chimes with the friar's own teaching on love. This translation also honors and focuses on the Trinitarian mystery integral to the friar's Carmelite spirituality and to his understanding of prayer. His Trinitarian emphasis shows the influence of his spiritual ancestors. As Teresa of Avila tells her convent sisters, quote, "All three persons have so much mercy and kindness that it is possible to experience this, quote, divine company in the deep center of the soul." And John of the Cross teaches that the soul has a divine triune image and that God invites each person to unite, quote, in the Holy Trinity, in power and wisdom and love. The friar shares their keen attention to participating daily in a loving, threefold deity. This kind divine community of the Trinity woven throughout the friar's teaching is a bedrock reality of the Christian religion, a healthy threeness, often missing or, quote, remote from everyday faith life, as theologian Anne Hunt points out. Mystics like the friar and 13th century poet Mechtild of Magdeburg, however, express the mystery of the Trinity as their home, as Mechtild's personified knowledge says to the soul, quote, "Du bist dreifaltig in dir, du kannst wohl Gottes Bild sein," or, quote, "You yourself are threeness, you can surely be God's image." In this experience, God is three individuals who live in a community where difference is respected and all are, quote, radically equal and one, as Hunt notes. Trinitarian difference is respected. Spirituality is intensely relational, quote, inclusive of everyone and everything, and distinguished by, quote, interdependence, charity, and love. Again, Hunt's words. And also a good summary of the friar's practice of the presence. To Brother Lawrence, the Trinity is the experience of friendship. This is so important. I want to read it again. Trinitarian spirituality is intensely relational, inclusive of everyone and everything, and distinguished by interdependence, charity, and love. Again, Hunt's words, and also a good summary of the friar's practice of the presence. To Brother Lawrence, the Trinity is the experience of friendship. This binary surpassing unified threeness at the center of the lived spirituality of Brother Lawrence is one reason that the representation of God in this translation has a home in pronouns they, themself, theirs. These signify the Trinitarian mystery of love, the friar's leitmotif, and limn the image of the Trinity's community, or perichoresis, described by Hunt as, quote, the active, mutual, equal relations without subordination among God's three persons who are God the Parent, Jesus, and Spirit here. These pronouns also respect the good, kind news inherent in the gospel, which means all are welcome. When I read these words, I can breathe, and I hope they do the same for others, opening space for every person and for mystery, keeping in mind the friar's kind Trinity and those marginalized by the power dynamic of the binary. This translation questions the philosophy underpinning the notion of translation purity in such a spiritual text, and gently moves beyond it accurately. As I translated and retranslated and was myself translated, the gold dazzled in the work of this true mystic, whose wisdom asked me every day to keep an open mind. The translation's immediacy follows the approach of the friar. My brief notes before each translated section frame the works. They give readers more background on his theology and use of language, insights into the friar's friends and others asking him for spiritual advice, where he was in his life's journey when he wrote the letters, and more on this book's rich publishing history. The appendices A, B, and C offer readers for the first time a timeline for the friar's life, eyewitness accounts of some of his century's catastrophes, and a schedule for how he spent his days. There are additional notes in the back matter. A further reading and listening section provides more background materials, and updated links and resource materials can be found on my website at www.carmenbutcher.com. The book is organized so readers can start anywhere in the text. You don't have to go from start to finish. Dip in wherever you like, and may you find joy and presence here. Thank you for listening, and blessings and peace to you all.